It's Sunday, July 14th, day 282 of the October 7th war. There's a hostage deal on the table, major developments in targeting the most senior of Hamas terrorist leaders, and ongoing attacks in Israel's north. We'll break it all down with urban war expert John Spencer of West Point, plus a conversation with journalist from Yemen, Luai Ahmed, whose views on Israel may surprise you. Keeping you up to date, I'm Michael Dixon, and this is Stand With Us TV live. Shalom from Israel. This weekend, we saw the appalling violence and assassination attempt of former President Trump. We wish him and all those injured well, and the family of the innocent person who was killed is very much in our thoughts. There, of course, can be no room for such political violence. In a moment, we'll get the latest news from the front line with military expert John Spencer, then hear from Yemeni writer Luai Ahmed. But first, the news headlines from the last week at war. Israeli troops targeted UNRWA headquarters in Gaza City, uncovering terror infrastructure used by Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad terrorists. An Israeli strike targeted longtime Hamas terror leader Mohammed Daif in Khan Yunis. Argentina has officially designated Hamas as a terrorist organization, marking the first such designation in South America. Over 10% of US Jews report frequent mistreatment due to their religious identity, highlighting ongoing anti-Semitic attitudes. Anti-Semitic hate crimes in June 2024 surged by 137% in New York City compared to the previous year, primarily targeting Jewish individuals and institutions. Noah and Nir Baranes tragically lost their lives in a Hezbollah rocket barrage, devastating their community just south of their hometown. Their deaths have deeply shaken their loved ones and sparked widespread mourning and reflection across the region. Well, joining us now is an Army veteran of 25 years service, an advisor to top four-star generals and senior leaders in the US Army, the chair of the Modern War Institute at West Point, and co-director of the Urban Warfare Project. He's a scholar, writer, speaker, and veteran who just made his third trip since October the 7th to Israel to research IDF tactics in urban warfare for the United States. It's a pleasure to welcome John Spencer back to Stand With Us TV. John, thank you for being with us on Stand With Us TV.
Thanks for having me back, Michael.
And so tell us about your recent visit to Israel and also your visit inside Gaza. What insights were you able to gather?
Well, it was my third visit to Israel and to Gaza, actually, since October 7th. Just continuing my research on the different phases of the operations in the IDF, meeting with both political leaders, but really embedding with the IDF, with the division commanders, hearing from them on how the fight has gone, the progress, their mission. And I traveled with the 99th into the Netzarim corridor, into central Gaza. I went to where the U.S. pier used to be, and talked to brigade commanders, battalion commanders about the challenges they're facing now in the different missions, as they're slowly, methodically accomplishing the goals. I also met with the Orkets unit to talk about the dog capabilities. As my research in urban warfare, but also in underground warfare, progresses in ensuring that the lessons are being learned, but also the unique challenges that the IDF faced, that's part of my research.
And of course, when Hamas attacked Israel 9 months ago and war broke out, Prime Minister Netanyahu outlined those three goals: destroy Hamas, number one; number two, free all the hostages; and number three, ensure that Gaza can never threaten Israel again. And so 9 months into the war, how close is Israel to those goals?
I think it's very close, but there's and as another big part, kind of a research theme that I was trying to get an assessment as, there have been all these false accusations that Israel is losing, a strategic defeat, As a strategist, that's definitely not, by every metric of the 3 goals Israel set, I think Israel is winning in Gaza, from returning the hostages through the use of military and diplomatic pressure. Destroying Hamas, no, that doesn't mean destroy Hamas as an idea. It means removing Hamas as the governing power of Gaza and dismantling its military capability, its leadership, its organized formations, its tunnels, its weapons supplies. The IDF are very surprisingly, very effectively have started to dismantle that capability. Also, with the securing the borders, which was a big part of my research, what that means. What does the new security framework between Israel and Gaza look like? By every metric, that they've accomplished things that I didn't think were possible at this rate. But by definition of who's winning, who's losing, it will require phases of the operation. So I think Israel is very close, and they've said this, but sometimes people get hung up on the wording. Israel is very close from transitioning out of high intensity combat to break apart organized formations of the Hamas military wing and transitioning into this lower intensity phase. This is the understanding that in order to achieve a strategic victory in Gaza, the Israel and the IDF will have to be a part of who replaces Hamas, as in the security framework of the different ideals of what the day after looks like. But for me, that is, the second phase. The first phase of any war is always remove the power and dismantle its military capability, so it doesn't have that capability to wage war against Israel, to conduct mass casualty events. Matter of fact, a lot of people have gotten it wrong that think this is a counter-terror campaign, and you have to fight the ideal of Hamas. Eventually you do. That's in phase 2, where you do de-radicalization strategies, reconciliation strategies, the rebuilding, the clear, hold, build, the hold and build part of that. That comes after removing the power from an area and its organized military capabilities, which the IDF have been very effective at. Of course, I think, yes, you could say it could have been done differently. The United States would have absolutely done it Gaza differently. It would have done it with overwhelming force, more combat power, aggressively achieved the goal quickly, pushed like Egypt to establish a humanitarian zone outside of Gaza. Many ways, but that's not the context in which this war has had to be fought in. So I'm significantly surprised at the progress and achievements of the IDF, despite the context in which the war, which is all wars, the political context and all the resources and the complexity of Hezbollah in the north, Iran attacking, and all these other factors.
And related to those goals, of course, we've heard over the weekend of high-profile targets being taken out by the IDF. Rafa al-Salame, the commander of Hamas's Khan Yunis brigade, being one of them. He was one of the masterminds behind the October the 7th massacre. He commanded over plans for the development of the tunnels in Khan Yunis. And of course, Mohammed Daif, the architect of the October 7th massacres and of multitudes of terror attacks in Israel. What's the impact of the elimination of these big names in Hamas?
I think the impact cannot be understated, because those are, when you assess a military capability, right, a power, the reason Hamas can rule is that it has both indirect and direct power over the population and military capability. Taking out the leadership of Hamas is an important part of dismantling its power architecture. Yes, you have to get to the military infrastructure and these high-level commanders that are also part of the military wing, like a brigade commander, which is huge, of Khan Yunis. It's breaking apart military capability. So when some uninformed analyst says, Hamas recruitment is up, like that is an irrelevant statistic, because of the fact that Hamas was a military on October 7th with vast capability. Experienced commanders like these are an important part of combat power. So this is why we've seen just last week, the IDF conducting larger raids against a much weaker Hamas force. 20 buildings being surrounded. They don't have their escape tunnels so they can run away and not fight. They don't have some of the bigger military capabilities. They don't have the organized, experienced, and these leaders like this. So Hamas has gotten weaker significantly. And this gets to the estimates of how effective the IDF has. So yes, those killings of those leaders who have run scared like rats, but still tried to organize operations and to maintain the will of all the rank and file fighters who are hiding. That's a big part of also getting to the goal of war, which is it's never to destroy every member of the other militaries, the enemy militaries. Never is to destroy their will to fight. And some of these leaders that are trying to escape and still run an underground military are a significant part of the enemy's will to fight. Why? That's a big part of war as well. And again, when you get into this other phase, once that military doesn't have the capability, then you get to these counter-terror, de-radicalization, reconciliation, new power constructs.
And much talk of a potential hostage deal. Now, we've seen Israeli negotiation teams in Doha and in Cairo. What makes a hostage deal more likely at this point from Hamas's point of view?
I think it's the real military pressure, right? Each side has its interest, and this is the ideal that Hamas would have negotiated for any hostages without levers of pressure on them, as we saw with Gilad Shalit for 5 years. It has been through the use of the IDF, through real military pressure, that led to the first hostage negotiation and is leading to the second one, where now the pressure is real and Hamas is trying to figure out any strategy it can to remain in power in Gaza with some capability. So the likelihood of another temporary pause, a hostage negotiation, is through the combination of real military pressure in dismantling Hamas to where it has to do a negotiation. And along with the diplomatic pressure, as it tries to, the enemy always gets a vote, tries to figure out a strategy to survive, which is its strategic goal, just survive in Gaza as an entity with power. So an ideal can always be there, but with power. So I think that the negotiation deal is very likely because of that military pressure.
Let's turn our attention to the north for a moment. Recently, the IDF's Northern Command and Operations Directorate released an approved battle plans, obviously not details, but approved battle plans for Lebanon following intensified fighting with Hezbollah. We've seen from Hezbollah non-stop rocket fire, the continued release of drone footage of northern Israel. What do you make of the timing of all of this, and what do you see as potential next steps?
I mean, the timing is, of course, the opportunist timing of Hezbollah, who wouldn't dare have attacked without this complexity of the war in Gaza. On October 8th, it began this attack and has launched thousands of rockets, all fully warranting a full-scale war of self-defense against them, but they're opportunists who believe in their rationale that there's a certain bar in which their attacks will be acceptable. But I do believe they're rational actors, where people try to put rational actor theory on Hamas, who says, I want all my population to die to achieve my psychological goal of the destruction of Israel. In the north, even the IDF statement of an improved plan is another form and another attempt, since this has been the goal of deterrence, diplomatic signaling, like, look, you're coming to a decision point, Hezbollah, where if you continue attacks, Israel will be forced to use military force against Israel has to repopulate its northern border. No other country would be required to accept this level of attacks for this long, to not have 80 to 100,000 citizens homeless for this long because of fears of escalation. But this is again why Gaza is so connected to the overall complexity of Israel's decisions is that Hezbollah says it's attacking because Israel is in Gaza. Once Israel achieves that first phase of dismantling major military capabilities, it can transition into a different phase and say that we've achieved this goal, this victory, this war aim, and we're transitioning into lower intensity operations, rebuilding, establishing new power, which will give Hezbollah, most thinking, an opportunity. Okay, this is a decision point. Do you, in your own mind, call some victory on your end while we reestablish the deterrence that is needed in the north? And October 7th, lots of lessons. The IDF, the Israel security framework. Yes, the IDF needs to be strengthened, needs to be maybe larger, a lot of the thinking in the to include in security, but Hezbollah gets to make decisions in this as well. And everybody hopes, I don't like the terms of they don't want escalation. Everybody hopes that Hezbollah will make a decision to stop attacking Israel, and then you have the Iranian vote, because Hezbollah is Iran's major proxy for what it envisions of the future of its destruction of Israel, and through Israel, the destruction of the United States. But this is the complexity of strategy that Israel has been faced with. It isn't a black and white decision of cut your losses here, fight the real enemy. It's all interconnected. But we're hitting a decision point, and Israel has said this, and others, a decision point where Hezbollah gets to make a decision, and that signals of Israel's strength and preparedness to do what's needed to defend itself, to reestablish its borders, to return a sense of safety to its citizens, fully prepared to do it. But Hezbollah gets the decision. Now, whether that's geographic, it backs up to the Litani River, all these other variables that are there, but we're approaching a very imminent decision point.
And of course, you're an expert in urban warfare. So in each case, you see how it happens, and in recent history, how it's reported and the response to it worldwide. What surprised you by the global reaction to this specific war?
Oh, I've gotten surprised since day one. Like calling Gaza the most densely populated place on earth when it's not, like the allowance of ideals about the law of war when you have a nation like Israel following every law of war, every measure that's ever been created to prevent civilian harm, and then creates new ones, and they're accused of intentionally causing civilian harm. I've been significantly surprised as an urban warfare scholar who knows what ever came before Israel's war against Hamas in Gaza, which was started by Hamas on October 7th. In urban terrain, the idea that you could do it with not a lot of destruction when you have a prepared defense for over 15 years, 400 miles of tunnels, when you have the world saying the 2,000-pound bomb is a weapon that can never be used in urban terrain. I'm so surprised that these ideals that have been out in the human rights community for a long time get real national policy implications when they're separated from the realities of urban combat, and have actually created the situation where you have combatants like Hamas who not only use human shields and what we call lawfare, where they turn every protected object in an entire territory, every hospital, every school, every mosque, into a military purposed building, so it can be protected from attack of even when the attacking military has a moral code, follows the law of war. These ideals about what can happen in urban combat will pull future warfare into urban areas, because any weaker force, especially one who doesn't follow the laws of war, sees the advantage on the international stage, on the international condemnation, on in the halls of the United Nations. It sees the advantage of the dilemma it causes for the world. Like, this is awful. We don't want this. We don't see this level of destruction. We don't want to see somebody using a population and trying to get civilians hurt. But by saying all these things about what should or could be happening in urban combat, these communities are actually pulling urban war into urban areas to where you would see more of this rather than a military following the law of war and being accused of ridiculous things like genocide and believing the human or the civilian casualty number coming from a terrorist organization that can't be true, is not true, that you could ever have a number during a battle. There's so many surprises that I think, of course, are problematic because they are wrapped in anti-Semitism. They are wrapped in anti-Israel ideals, because I've never seen the strength of these ideals in any other war in any other period. But they're so problematic if people don't understand that what you're saying about what the standard that you're trying to hold Israel to, which isn't a double standard, it's a standard that doesn't exist. That means for other Western militaries who are, even if they're in a fight of survival on their borders, you're saying that they can't fight back. They can't even follow the law of war and execute a very discriminate, very constrained operation because the costs are too much. These people, these groups, these advocates are actually causing more harm by trying to create a standard and hold Israel to a standard that doesn't exist.
Certainly high stakes there for all of Israel's allies. And just finally, you've come on a professional basis to Israel. As you said many times, you spent time with our fighting forces who have, of course, been fighting since October the 7th. That's 9 months. And you've studied the massacres of October the 7th in detail. We've discussed it on previous shows. And of course, on your podcast, you go through it methodically. I wondered, though, what was your analysis of the people you met, the fighters themselves, those soldiers? Are they up for the continued fight?
Absolutely. War is a contest of will, and whether I meet with, in this trip, I went to, the hostage square, listened to the families of the hostages. I went to different areas where the veterans who have lost fellow soldiers, their views. One of the consensus to include from my visit, not December of 2023 to February to this past week, is that the resolve and the will to continue to fight is there, which is really important in a democracy. That, of course, the enemy attacks not just the military, which Hamas had no idea of fighting the IDF. They're trying to attack the will of even the Israeli population to continue to fight because of the cost, right? To have a reserve force mobilized, fighting in such a difficult context, it wears at the will of the people. But in both with the individual soldiers in the field who are very disciplined, very focused on the task that they've been given, understands the restraints on the use of force, to the everyday civilians who are, of course, frustrated by it all, but the will to continue to fight because they know it's actually an existential fight, and visiting a nation who's in a real existential fight and the complexities of that, because everybody has, ideals and are frustrated about, well, what are we going to do about this? What are we going to do with that? But collectively, from the individual soldier to political leaders to everyday Israelis, I felt that very solid will and understanding of we have to do these things. We have to establish, and keep the will to continue to fight.
Absolutely. Well, John Spencer, we value your service, your expertise, your analysis, and your voice. Thank you so much for being with us once again on Stand With Us TV.
Thank you.
Now, in the 9 months of this ongoing war, Israel has faced attacks on multiple fronts, from Hamas in Gaza, in the West Bank, Judea, Samaria, Hezbollah on its northern border, Syrian and Iraqi militias, the Islamic Republic of Iran, let's not forget, and the Houthi rebels in Yemen. They've often been an overlooked and underestimated enemy, but they've been firing ballistic missiles at Israel and attacking international shipping, disrupting global supply lines. For years, they've chanted slogans like "Death to America," "Death to Israel," "A curse upon the Jews," and "Victory to Islam." And so today, we'll hear from our guest who grew up in Yemen. He'll shed light on the indoctrination he received and how he transformed from becoming an anti-Semite to a staunch supporter of Israel and the Jewish people. He's the journalist and host of Builders of the Middle East, and he joins us from Sweden. It's a pleasure to welcome Luai Ahmed. Luai, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
And one of the things we often say here at Stand With Us is that education is the road to peace. And that very much is part of your story, I know. So why don't you take us back? Tell us what it was like in Yemen in terms of how you were taught to view Jewish people and Israel.
So I grew up in Yemen, in Sana'a, the capital city. And for 20 years, all I ever heard about the Israelis and Jews is that they're evil, that they want to destroy the Middle East. And more than that, many conspiracy theories about them ruling the world and ruling the media, and they do it so that they can suppress the Muslims and the Christians. And above all, the biggest narrative is actually about Palestine. When I grew up, my family is a very hardcore pro-Palestinian family. We had a Palestinian flag in our home. Even when I turned 16, I even told myself that I wanted to get a Handala tattoo, which is a tattoo that symbolizes the Palestinian cause. And that is because ever since we're children, we are fed this narrative of the Jewish people and the Israelis being the enemy, those who control the world, the evil, and those who you shan't name, the ones that we should get to. And in Islamic doctrine, you have, the angels and the devils. And in human form, the Jews represented the devils. In hadiths, we learned that God turned the apes into the Jews because they refused to obey him. And the Jews who live today are the descendants of apes, which is funny because we don't learn anything about evolution theory, for example, in Yemen. The curriculum is 30 to 40% Islamic studies. So I grew up my entire life learning about the hadiths and fiqh, which is the sayings of Prophet Muhammad. And I was forced to memorize the sayings of Prophet Muhammad just so I would be able to go through school. And it's devastating because it was only when I left Yemen, where I started to open up my mind. But more than just anti-Semitism and hatred towards Israelis and Israel, there's a strong sentiment of we need to destroy Israel. It's like a cancer in the Middle East, and we have to get rid of this cancer just so we can develop. And even in progressive circles, the only thing that united Muslims and seculars and right-wing and left-wing and atheists and deists and any kind of Muslim, any kind of person or human being in Yemen, the only thing that united them was the hatred to Israel and believing that we have to destroy it. And I believed it as well, of course. I believed that the main reason that Yemen and the Middle East is so regressive and we don't have human rights or democracy or equality is because of Israel and the Jews. And it's so sad for me to look back at it now, because I remember how I was filled with so much hatred. I was filled with so much resentment towards Israelis and Jews. And I truly believed that Jewish people and Israeli people are just evil, liars, hypocritical. And I believe that I never thought that I would ever meet a Jew or an Israeli in my life. So when it finally happened in Sweden and Halmstad, and I met an Israeli exchange student, just as soon as he said, "I am from Israel," I had like a physical reaction. It was not violent. I just blacked out and I could no longer hear him because it was so traumatic. It was like meeting the devil that I all my life learned that I need to destroy. And his instant reaction upon me saying that I'm from Yemen was kindness and telling me he's going to make jahnoon and make Yemeni food for me and all of that. And even when he was being sweet and kind and bubbly, my initial reaction was, he's lying. He's just trying to put on a facade so that I would trust him, and then he's going to stab me in the back or something like that. And that brainwashing is something that took me 10 years from that moment. That happened 2016 now, around 8 years for me to cleanse that hatred out of me. And the only way I was able to do it was by actually meeting Jews. He was the first Jew that I met, and then I met a few Israelis and Jews after him in Sweden, and fell in love with them. The Israelis that I met and Jews that I met in Sweden, not many, quite a handful, were just the sweetest people that I've ever met. And I'm not, like, I say they're the sweetest people because Swedish people are very polite and not warm. They don't hug. They're not bubbly. But the Israelis and Jews who were in Sweden were just like Yemenis, very vibey and sweet and kind. I'll make you food. Let's go hang out. And that was the only way I was able to start reading and educating myself and reading about the Holocaust, because when it comes to the Holocaust, we of course learned that it never happened and it should have happened. The word Holocaust, we call it Mahraqat al-Yahud, which is the burning of the Jews. I never heard it that much in Yemen. I maybe heard it like 3 or 4 times, and in the discourse of it never happened and it should have happened. So it is very daunting to say all of these things, because when I talk to Israelis and Jews and I speak about this dire anti-Semitism, they don't understand just the depths of it. I know that Jews and Israelis are aware of international anti-Semitism. But when I tell you that I would sit in my mosque praying to God, and my imam would suddenly start repeating, kill the Jews, kill the Zionists, Allah will kill, was something that stuck with me. Was not just may God kill the Jews, may God defeat the Zionists, may God kill the Israelis. The thing that really stuck with me was when they would repeat every Friday, may God orphan them, make them orphans. Because when I was a kid, I remember, wait, that's a bit too harsh. Okay, Israelis and Jews and Zionists are evil, but make them orphans? That I wouldn't wish that upon my worst enemies, and the Jews and Zionists were my worst enemies. So that level of hatred made sense to me back then, because I was programmed to absorb the idea of Israelis and Jews as the devils reincarnated in human form. And I think now what we see, I interviewed a beautiful lady in Israel the other week, and I told her, what do you think of Yemen? And she said, I don't know anything about Yemen, but they're throwing missiles at us. What's up with that? Why do you hate us? What do we do to you? And I didn't have time to explain to her, but I would have told her, my love, like ever since we're children, our top leaders, our imams, our politicians brainwash us to believe that the murder and the deletion of the Israeli state and the Jewish people was the only way that we would be able to thrive and flourish. So anti-Semitism in Yemen and in the Middle East is something else. It's on steroids, because there is anti-Semitism in Sweden, but it's nothing compared to the anti-Semitism that I grew up with.
And so there's a big leap, isn't there, between you educating yourself, meeting real Israelis and Jews, and then going out there publicly and making videos post-October the 7th about how you feel and how you see the world. Tell us about some of the videos you've created and the impetus for why you did that.
So actually the turning point for me, there are so many turning points for me. So many things so like when I met the Jews and Israelis, to me it was like, oh, okay, they're nice, they're kind people, but I've only met like 4, 5 actually Jews. So like maybe they're not representatives of all the Jews. It was not something that I thought about a lot, but like I'm like, oh, I actually have some great Jewish friends and coworkers, and I love them. But I never paid a deeper thought. I never sat and kind of like reflected upon it that much. When October 7 happened, it was very traumatic for me. It was the most. I have very few traumatic days in my life. Like leaving Yemen to Sweden was the most traumatic day in my life, and then the second most traumatic day of my life would be October 7, because when I opened Twitter, the first thing that I saw was the video of Noah being carried on the motorbike, and I thought it was a movie. I was reading the captions. I'm like, there's no way this is happening. And then the more that I started scrolling and I started seeing the footages, I started crying because of how disgusting the footage was and how heartbreaking it was. But to me, it was a moment of, oh my God, Luai, you would have thought that this was okay if you were still in Yemen and never met Jews and Israelis. You would have cheered on this. You would have thought that this was resistance, because all my life I've been hearing resistance and military resistance against Zionists and Jews is justified. And then upon that, I started seeing the reactions of my family members, of my friends, of people on the internet, of people's on the streets in Malmo and London and New York celebrating it. And that was the moment when I realized, wow, the Holocaust was real. The world is disgustingly and deeply anti-Semitic, because they don't know the Jewish people. They don't know my Jewish coworkers who I love so much. They don't know the beauty of the few Jews that I met. Like, my coworkers who were Jewish could have been in Israel. They could have been slaughtered. And here I see my family and my friends and people on the street everywhere cheering and clapping and saying this is a victory. I immediately uploaded a video on X and TikTok and everywhere saying, this is not going to do anything for Palestinians. This is a disgusting and malicious act. It's terrorism. This is ISIS. This is literally ISIS. Everybody was against ISIS, but somehow when it's killing the Jews, it's fine. And when I said that, when I reacted to the reactions of October 7, I saw so much resistance. My best friend and my brother, who is my soulmate, deleted me, blocked me from their lives. And I just couldn't fathom how, well, I could fathom it because like I was in their shoes, but I just couldn't take it. So I started like engaging more, uploading videos, talking about my experiences, talking about how, guys, I used to be anti-Semitic and now I'm not, because I actually met Jews and Israelis, and there's a distinction between the government and the people. And the Yemeni government is the worst government in the world, the southern government and the Houthi rule. But that does not mean that we should celebrate the murder and deaths of Yemenis. And in the same line, when the war evolved and Israel started attacking back and killing a lot of Palestinians, it's like all of these protests going out for me were just purely anti-Semitic, because for 10 years, and this is something that I say all the time, that for 10 years I saw my country get slaughtered. 400,000 Yemenis were murdered. There's a famine going on that barely anyone is talking about. And I never saw people protesting or raising the Yemeni flags or starting campaigns and movements to liberate the Yemeni people from the Saudi and the Iranian war. And here, less than 2,000 Palestinians were killed, and I saw people going out in millions. And the only explanation that I had for it, the only logical explanation, was anti-Semitism. So I decided to visit Israel, and I'll admit to you that upon going to Israel, in the back of my head, I used to say, well, actually, you've met Israelis and Jews, but you've only met very few. Expect racism, Luai. Expect to be interrogated in the airport and expect people to scream at you, expect people to be angry at you, expect people to treat you with racism, expect apartheid, expect all of these things that you've learned about Israel and the Israeli people. And being in Israel for the first 10 days in November, even though the country was going through the most daunting and traumatic time, I never fell in love with a country as much as I fell in love with Israel and Israelis. They were all just the sweetest and kindest, even though this is November, right after October, and the country was mourning. I immediately fell in love with the people and made so many friends and acquaintances and people that just went straight into my heart, like my closest best friends. And I'm like, guys, I go on X and Instagram and everywhere, and all of my comments is, you're justifying genocide. Israelis are colonial, fascist, Nazis. And the more that I read how people were describing Israelis and Jewish people, which was a complete contrast to my experience of the Israeli people and the Jewish people, the more that I felt that I have to speak up. And the more that I started engaging, the more that I realized that I have been wasting 10 years of my life trying to engage in Swedish politics. Like, prior to October 7th, I've been on Swedish TV, I've been on Swedish podcast, I've been on different channels talking about the danger of Islamic extremism and how migration from the Middle East is impacting Sweden and the West in the ways that we see now. And in Sweden, the reactions from the Swedes is just, they're all very naive. I call them Teletubbies. They live very secluded and isolated. So they're ignorant to the dangers of Islamism and Islamic fascism. And many leftists, like far left people, used to call me like fascist and racist just because I say Islamism is a problem and Islamic terrorists are a threat to Sweden. So with the Israelis and the Jewish people, they are well aware of what Islamic terrorism and Islamic fascism leads to. They're very versed on the technicalities of Arabic and Islamic culture. So it did not feel like visiting a foreign country. It felt like I was visiting a country that was populated by the most beautiful aspects of the West and the East. It has the warmth and beauty and kindness and sweetness of the Middle East. And it has the liberation and human rights and democracy and progressive thinking and scientific-based understanding of life of the West. And I immediately fell in love with Israel. So I continued my work, and I continue my work because the amount of people that I've lost I've lost around, if I count them, maybe like 6 people who are very close to me, including my brother and a best friend. And when it comes to my family members, they have all deleted me. Like, and we're a big family. We're like 50 plus people. Every single one of them has kind of like thrown me under the bus. And that just makes me feel like, wow, I need to speak up more about this, because I need to let my Arab and Muslim family and friends understand how wrong they are. And now I make thoughtful videos that show the beauty of Israel, but also humanize Israelis, but also humanize the Palestinians. Because I say that it is not the fault of the Palestinians that they get radicalized as they are. It is the mosques and it is the schools, the same ones that taught me to hate the Jews and the Israelis. They are doing the same thing in Palestine. So for me, the biggest issue at hand when it comes to Israel is the de-radicalization of the Palestinian population, because we do want a Palestinian state that is actually a Palestinian state that functions to serve the Palestinian people, not to eradicate Israel.
And you mentioned a bit about the Houthis. So how do you feel when you see protests on American university campuses and they're chanting, Yemen, Yemen, make us proud, turn another ship around, at this time when you've seen the Houthis firing rockets towards Israel, causing havoc in global shipping? What would you like to tell those American students, or if you had the opportunity?
I would tell them that my mother is a feminist human rights activist who has been fighting for human rights all her life. And the Houthis killed her best friend. The Houthis shut down her human rights organization. The Houthis shut down all human rights organizations in northern Yemen. The Houthis have dismantled and destroyed and demolished a country that was already destroyed and demolished. So before the Houthis took over Yemen, there was already over 70% of the Yemeni population that were impoverished, meaning that they were living under poverty. And the Houthis took over, and the situation has only gotten worse. Not to mention, like, the complete silencing of human rights organizations and civil society organizations is one thing, but the complete fascist, extremist, radical, tribal, military rule that they have right now on Yemen is destroying Yemen in ways that we haven't seen before. I mean, the Houthis, their main thing, their logo, which I used to see everywhere in Yemen, says, they want to destroy America and destroy Israel. That's basically what they want, and victory to Islam, and curse upon the Jews, right? Their main ideology, their main source of existence, their main reason of existing is to destroy other people, is to kill Americans, kill Jews and Zionists. And you will never be able to have to make Yemen a proper functional country when you have a ruler that is destructive and just destroys and kills people. Another thing is that Yemen does not need another war with Israel or the UK and the West. We just had a truce with Saudi Arabia last year, and now they're starting a war with big powers that are completely going to destroy Yemen. And then they're all going to go out and start protesting for Yemen, of course. Once Israel, I'm not sure if Israel is going to start attacking Yemen, but once Israel starts attacking Yemen, that will be the only time that we see people going out on the street and raising the Yemeni flag and saying, "Free Yemen," because of anti-Semitism. It's only when it's the Jewish and the Zionists, Jewish and Zionist people who are defending themselves, there and then people go out and start saying, we have to defend the people that the Zionists are attacking. And these left, like far left, because mostly it's far left people who go out and say, from the river to the sea, and just support Palestine. Those people are also a part of the destruction of the West, because of them, they have allowed, in Europe's case, in Sweden's case, they have allowed for an unregulated migration that just let in more than 2 million people from the Middle East without even asking them, without making sure that they are aligned with the values and the society of the Swedish country and the Swedish people. And now you see how Europe is turning upside down, and there's a right-wing wave and the populist wave that is taking over and sweeping across the entire world because of the leftists and the same people who go out and say destruction to the Zionist state and all of that. So these people, like, I honestly don't engage with leftists. I don't debate. I've gotten so tired in the past 10 years trying to explain to them what Islamic extremism is. Because once you say Islamic extremism, they just tell you that you're a fascist and a racist. So I wouldn't say anything to them, honestly. I make videos and I make content for the people that are accessible, who are able to absorb information, who are able to understand the complexities of the Middle East. But those people who just learned what a Palestine was like 8 months ago, I have nothing to say to them, honestly.
And your content is powerful. It's really excellent, and it's very rich in information. Here at Stand With Us, we have a reach of 1.5 billion people on social media since October the 7th. But what many people don't know is that Arabic is actually our second most viewed language after English. And so I wanted to ask you, what's your hope in what you're building? You're part of Builders of the Middle East. People should check out all of your videos and view them and share them. But what's your hope for that Middle East? For the people in the Middle East who are watching your videos, what's your hope of what that future would look like?
What I want to show them, what I want to show people in the Middle East, most specifically Yemenis, my people. And the last video that I did in Israel has gone super viral in Yemen, by the way. And I have been a hot topic in Yemen for the past 6-7 days. And most of them are just calling me a Zionist, an ignorant person, an idiot, a faggot. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say this word here, but they have all just sexualized and demonized me because of my content, because of me being in Israel. And so, yes, so on the one hand, it's sad that all of the reactions have been very anti. People have written plenty of think pieces trying to decipher why Luai Ahmed, a Yemeni guy, went to Israel. Many conspiracy theories of me being paid by the Israeli government. And what I'm happy about is that it has led them to see me, like the video, if you've not seen it, is me being in Israel, talking to people and hugging people, having really fruitful conversations with people on the street, walking around in my Yemeni clothes, and just being my most authentic self in Israel without being, there's no apartheid. I don't see, I haven't been treated racistly by anybody. So it's like, I'm happy. I know for sure that there are tens of thousands of Yemenis who have seen the clip and have read and have followed the video and stuff, who are opening their minds and seeing, wow, like this is actually a Yemeni guy in Israel who's talking to people, who's going around vlogging like a normal person. Like I even go around and tell people I'm from Yemen. What do you think of Yemen? And people's reaction are so like sweet and funny. So the Yemenis are seeing the Israelis, and they're watching this Yemeni interact with Israelis and Jews, and they're seeing the authenticity and the sweetness, the beautiful air in the video. And I know for sure that changes their minds, that opens their minds, that makes them realize that, wait, maybe they don't hate us that much. Maybe we are the ones who hate them. So I'm hoping to change people's minds in the perspective of humanization of Jews and Israelis, because it's so daunting to me to, whenever I talk to my close friends, or because I do have many friends who are anti-Semitic and hate Israel, when I talk to them and because I don't cut people off because of their opinions, but people do cut me off because of my opinions. But the friends who I have who are anti-Semitic and have decided not to cut me off, we have conversations all the time. And the things that I hear them say about Israelis and Jews just makes my heart shrink. And that's why I feel like also that the Jewish people have stood up for minorities louder than anybody else in Europe and in the West. And now when we see how the Jewish people are being slaughtered and hated, and we see genocidal tropes everywhere against them, no one is standing up for them. Well, thankfully, there are people standing up for them. But when you compare it to Black Lives Matter, when you compare it to the LGBTQ movement, it's just so heartbreaking to me. And I'm just going to keep on triggering them and hopefully changing their minds and having them see the truth, because I'm not doing propaganda. I'm not doing hasbara, as they call it. I'm not explaining. I'm showing them my truth, the truth that I experienced, the beautiful Israelis that I met, their kindness, how I hate how many Israelis that I've met have had to tell me, but like, I don't hate the Arabs. I don't hate Muslims. I just want us to live in peace. And it's so painful for me to experience Israelis having to explain this to me, because we're literally just sitting and having a beer and having a good time, and they know I don't have these opinions of them. But Israelis have been really demonized by the international community and by the leftists and anti-Semites and Nazis. And it's just like, I feel like Israel has really entered my heart, and not just because the food is amazing and the people are beautiful and Tel Aviv is awesome and the beach and all. It's just like, it's the most beautiful country in every single way. But for me, Israel is kind of like the underdog. But beyond being the underdog, the most beautiful thing about Israel, it is the most scientific and academic country in the entire Middle East and the Arab world. In that whole region, Israel produces more scientific and academic papers than the entire region combined. And for me, in the beginning, you talked about education. It is through education that we're going to be able to cleanse ourselves from Islamic extremism and anti-Semitism. I want us to be like the Jews in Israel. It's so crazy that I grew up thinking, I want to kill the Jews, I want to kill the Zionists, and now I say I want us to be like the Jews and Zionists. That's what education does. That's
Absolutely.
what, yeah.
Absolutely. And I'm sorry for the people that you've lost in your life as a result of this, but I have to tell you, you've gained many, many more people in your life. and we will diffuse the hate that you faced with love. And so many of us are cheering you on and standing with you and counting you as a brother. So Luai, I want to thank you for your bravery, for your courage, and for your voice. And like you said, people are giving you a hug. I'm giving you a virtual hug, but I can't wait to see you when you're in Israel as well. I'll give you a real one too. So thanks so much for being with us. We appreciate it so, so much.
Thank you so much for having me, and keep on the good fight. There are so many people all around the world who support you and will continue to do it.
Amen to that. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Don't forget, if you enjoy our live shows and want to be kept up to speed with all that's happening in Israel, please be sure to click the subscribe button on Stand With Us YouTube. Now, before we go, our hearts and minds are, of course, constantly with the hostages and their families. And last week, 29 children who were held hostage by Hamas in Gaza and freed were taken on vacation to Orlando, Florida, for a trip filled with fun and the opportunity to simply be kids again. Many of these children still have relatives who are held hostage in Gaza or were murdered on October the 7th. Take a look.
יותר מדי שעות לבד בחדר הזה, אני הפכתי את הכאב הזה לעוד מחזה, אני חייב להתאפס לחזור להיות כזה כמו הגשם, לא חבל על הדמעות השעות החשובות של הלילה צוות את עיניי השש
Heartwarming indeed. A reminder that you can keep our work going strong by donating at standwithus.com/donate. And thank you for that. We're sending love to the Israeli troops and to our brothers and sisters and allies worldwide. And our prayers for every hostage to be back home with their family soon. Together we will prevail. Thanks for watching. Am Yisrael Chai.